My name is Isabella Carter, and if you were to look at me today standing at the helm of a $1 billion empire, with reporters following my every move, you would never imagine where I came from. I wasn't always the woman the world now admires. Once, I was just the forgotten daughter of the Carter family, dismissed, ridiculed, and branded as a disgrace. Growing up in a wealthy household, I thought I had it all: stability, love, and a sense of belonging. But in reality, my family only valued perfection. My older brothers, Jonathan and Edward, were the golden sons. My younger sister, Amelia, was the darling princess who could do no wrong. And me? I was the shadow they wished didn't exist. It all began unraveling when I was 17. I fell in love with someone my family considered beneath us, Marcus Hayes, the son of our chauffeur. He was intelligent, ambitious, and the only person who made me feel truly seen. But to my parents, he was a stain on the Carter name. When they discovered our relationship, the fury in my father's eyes could have burned the world down. "You have tainted this family's bloodline," he hissed at me during one of the most humiliating family confrontations of my life. "From this day forward, Isabella, you are nothing but a shame to us." I was devastated, but I refused to give Marcus up. For that, my punishment was merciless. My brothers stopped acknowledging me. Amelia mocked me openly. At family gatherings, I became invisible. My parents made it clear I was no longer welcome at any significant Carter event. The ultimate betrayal came when my siblings started getting married, one after another. Lavish weddings filled with gold chandeliers, international guest lists, and headlines in society columns. Each time, I received no invitation. Each time, my absence was explained away with a chillingly rehearsed excuse: "She is not one of us anymore." I was no longer Isabella Carter, the daughter of the elite. I was simply the outcast who had shamed the family. I cried myself to sleep for months, mourning the loss of the only life I had known. But Marcus believed in me when no one else did. He held my hand and whispered, "One day, Isabella, you'll be so powerful that they'll regret ever erasing you." At the time, it sounded like a fairy tale. But I didn't know then that he was right, because life has a way of circling back. And when it did, it gave me the sweetest weapon of all: revenge cloaked in success. Exile has a peculiar taste, bitter at first, yet intoxicating once you learn to savor it. My estrangement from the Carter dynasty could have annihilated me. But instead, it became the crucible in which my steel was forged. Marcus, with his relentless intellect and audacious vision, refused to allow me to wallow in despair. "You are not broken, Isabella," he would insist, his eyes alight with conviction. "You are merely unshackled." Together, we embarked upon a journey no one in my gilded family could have fathomed. We began humbly, almost ignobly, by investing every dollar we scraped together into an emerging tech startup. Nights bled into mornings as Marcus and I labored in cramped offices, fueled by little more than caffeine, hunger, and vengeance. While my siblings were toasting champagne beneath crystal chandeliers, I was drafting contracts beneath flickering fluorescent bulbs. But adversity sharpens the mind. I devoured knowledge like a starved creature: economics, corporate law, international trade. The very skills my family believed I lacked became my arsenal. Marcus was the strategist, I was the executor. Our synergy was ruthless, uncompromising. Within a decade, the empire we constructed had metastasized across continents. From New York to Singapore, our holdings flourished: real estate, luxury retail, and most lucratively, technology. With every merger signed and every competitor vanquished, I felt the ghost of my father's condemnation dissipating. The same society pages that once glorified my siblings now whispered my name with reverence: Isabella Hayes, the enigmatic magnate who emerged from oblivion to dominate the global stage. Yet despite the opulence that now surrounded me, yachts, penthouses, and a retinue of advisors, my heart was still tethered to a singular memory, standing at the threshold of my brother Jonathan's wedding. Denied entry like a criminal. It was not wealth that I craved. It was reckoning, and fate, ever so deliciously ironic, presented me with the perfect stage. For in the year I turned 35, Marcus and I were preparing to host our own wedding. Not a modest ceremony hidden from prying eyes, but a spectacle so grand, so resplendent, that it would eclipse every Carter celebration before it. The price tag? Over $40 million, a union sanctified not merely by love, but by triumph over betrayal. and as I scanned the glittering guest list of presidents, magnates, and aristocrats, one decision crystallized with icy clarity: the Carters would not receive an invitation. When the news of my wedding broke, it spread like wildfire through every social circle that once mocked me. Headlines screamed of the opulence: heiress turned mogul to host $40 million ceremony of the decade. Journalists speculated about the guest list, the venue, the couture gowns commissioned from Paris. The world was watching, and for once, the story was mine to tell. And then came the silence I had been craving for years, because my family, the Carters, were not on that list. Not Jonathan, with his smug smile and hollow successes, not Edward, who had once told me I'd never amount to more than a cautionary tale, not Amelia, whose venomous whispers followed me like a curse in every ballroom, not even my parents, who had branded me a disgrace and cast me into exile. Their absence was no accident. It was deliberate, calculated, and absolute. When the realization hit them, I imagine it must have been a moment of exquisite devastation. Invitations were arriving across oceans, mailed to dukes, celebrities, prime ministers. My family? Nothing. Not a word. They were ghosts to me now, as I had once been to them, but society has no mercy for the fallen. The whispers began immediately. Did you hear? Isabella didn't invite her family. Not one of them. I could practically feel the sting of humiliation across their faces. At luncheons and galas, they were no longer envied, but pitied. Questions followed them like vultures circling carrion. Why would your own daughter exclude you? What could she be hiding? The Carters, so accustomed to control, suddenly found themselves on trial in the court of reputation. And the irony was almost poetic, because for years, they had erased me in the name of their so-called honor. Now, their very honor was collapsing under the weight of my silence. Marcus would sometimes ask me if I felt guilty. I would simply smile. They banned me from their weddings because I shamed the family. Let them now taste the exquisite bitterness of being erased from mine. And oh, how sweet that bitterness was becoming. The morning of my wedding rose like a coronation. The sun itself seemed to bow, spilling golden light over the coastal estate we had transformed into a palace. White roses lined the marble walkways, crystal chandeliers swayed in the ocean breeze, and a string quartet played as guests arrived in limousines that gleamed like liquid silver. Every camera lens, every microphone, every flashing bulb turned toward me, toward the woman once branded a disgrace. I walked through the grand hall, my gown, a masterpiece sewn with thousands of hand-cut diamonds, and felt the intoxicating gaze of the world resting on my shoulders. I was no longer invisible. I was a storm, a spectacle, a queen. But beyond the velvet ropes and gilded gates, I knew my family was watching. Jonathan, Edward, Amelia, and my parents, all of them had arrived in the city days earlier. They hadn't received an invitation, yet pride, or perhaps desperation, had driven them close enough to witness what they could not touch. I heard whispers that Jonathan had tried to leverage old political allies for entry, that Amelia had wept to mutual acquaintances, begging for a seat at the ceremony. Their pleas met only with silence. The Carter name, once ironclad, now cracked beneath the weight of exclusion. Reporters circled them like sharks, eager for blood. Why were you left out? Why would Isabella deny her own family? Each question carved deeper into their carefully maintained façade, and on the day of my triumph, the contrast was merciless. Inside the estate, chandeliers glittered, violins soared. Presidents raised their glasses in honor of Marcus and me. Outside the gates, the Carters stood in shadows, uninvited, their dignity unraveling thread by thread. It was not cruelty that kept them there, it was justice. For every moment they had humiliated me, for every time they had labeled me unworthy, fate had given me the stage to return their verdict. As I walked toward the altar, Marcus, waiting with unwavering pride, I felt no guilt, no hesitation. The world was finally witnessing the truth, and the truth was this: I was never the stain on the family. They were. The vows had just been spoken when a sudden commotion rippled beyond the gates. Murmurs spread like wildfire through the guests. At first, I ignored it until the soft chime of my phone vibrated in the hidden pocket of my gown. A message from the security head: your family is attempting to breach the perimeter. I almost smiled. Of course they couldn't endure it any longer. To watch the child they once discarded, exalted before the world, was agony. They couldn't swallow. Moments later, I saw them: Jonathan, his once pristine suit drenched in sweat, shouting at guards. Edward, furious, hurling threats at journalists, capturing every second of his disgrace. Amelia, trembling, mascara streaked down her cheeks. And my parents silent, pale, their desperation visible in every faltering step as they begged for entry. But the gates did not yield. Instead, the cameras turned. Every lens abandoned the altar for the spectacle unraveling outside. My wedding, already a global headline, now carried a darker subplot, the disowned family clawing to be included. I took the microphone Marcus and I had planned to use for our joint toast. But instead of a soft declaration of gratitude, my voice sliced through the evening like tempered steel. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, allow me to clarify something that has lingered in whispers. The hall fell silent. Guests leaned forward. I was once told I was unfit, that I tainted the Carter name, that I was unworthy to stand as their daughter, their sister. Tonight, you see the truth. The stain was never mine. It was theirs, their arrogance, their cruelty, their hypocrisy. And now, the doors they slammed in my face remain closed to them. A hush spread. Then thunderous applause. Outside, Jonathan bellowed my name, face red with fury. Amelia collapsed into tears. My mother clutched her pearls, while my father turned his back, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of humiliation. Inside, I raised my glass. To truth, I declared. To a new beginning, free of those who mistook power for righteousness. The crowd roared, crystal flutes clinking in harmony. At that moment, the Carters were not merely excluded, they were exposed. And in the collision of grandeur and disgrace, the world chose its side. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night did not fade. News outlets devoured every image, every video. The Carters, once symbols of aristocratic authority, had become a tragic cautionary tale. Jonathan resigned from his consultancy firm after investors withdrew. Edward's engagement collapsed when his fiancé's family refused to tether themselves to scandal. Amelia, once the darling of high society, vanished from public view entirely, unable to withstand the humiliation that followed her wherever she went. My parents, they attempted silence. But silence, when weighed against truth, becomes confession. Their names carried only pity now, no longer prestige. And me? I returned to Monte Carlo with Marcus, our honeymoon stretching across coastlines bathed in moonlight. Yet it wasn't the grandeur that anchored me, it was the stillness. For the first time, my breath felt unshackled, my steps my own. One evening, as the tide whispered against the rocks, Marcus asked, "Do you regret it?" Not their absence, but the finality of it. I considered his words. Regret, a peculiar ghost, one that haunted many, but not me. I do not regret, I replied, my voice steady. They banished me for shaming the family, when the shame was theirs all along. Excluding them wasn't vengeance, it was justice. And justice rarely leaves room for regret. He smiled, drawing me into his arms. And beneath the lavender dusk, I felt something I had long thought impossible: peace. The world eventually moved on. Another scandal rose, another family fell. But for those who remembered, my story remained a testament that power built on cruelty corrodes, that bloodlines do not define worth, that erasure can be survival, and exclusion, a liberation. And if someday, years from now, someone asks me about the Carters, I will not recount their wealth, their titles, or their ruin. I will say simply, they taught me what family should never be. And in losing them, I gained myself.